Hello, and welcome to the Guns on Pegs podcast with me, George Brown.
And me, Chris Horn.
Chris, that was very good. You're getting better at this. There was no pause at all that time.
Despite the fact that you do a little script for this, and on it says, and me, George Brown. I've just noticed it. Yeah, all good. Hey, you've just been back from fishing, aren't you?
I am just back from fishing. We had a very nice time indeed. We finished on 25 salmon for the week. I had 3. The first one on the stroke of 10 o'clock on Monday morning, which is always a nice way to begin the week. It sort of takes the pressure off. But most importantly, my wife caught her first 2 salmon. One on Wednesday afternoon and another one on Thursday.
Right, so this is going one of 2 ways then. What does that mean going forward for your wallet, for your time alone, for all these other things?
Well, my theory is, as I've explained on the podcast before, that if I can get my wife into salmon fishing, I will be permitted to do more salmon fishing. Now, she's got 5 years of saying that she isn't interested in salmon fishing to back down from. So I haven't actually asked her if she enjoys salmon fishing yet. I'm letting it settle in a bit. But the hope is that she will say, oh, yes, salmon fishing is the most marvellous thing in the world. How silly of me to ever have doubted it. We must do more salmon fishing. So it will mean that my bank balance is tested a bit more, but I think it's a small price to pay for more than 1 week of salmon fishing a year.
Good luck. I think it's the only thing we can say at that point.
Yeah, well, I'm really pleased. She came up, she had a lovely time. The kids were there. They loved it. My theory with doing the journey in one hit, by the way, of getting the kids up at 4 a.m. and putting them in the car and then they'd sleep till T-Bay, did not work. They were absolutely wired for the first 6 hours of the journey.
Oh, no.
Which was a bit of a catastrophe. But the rest of it...
That involves one of you sitting in the back, doesn't it?
No, we were both in the front, but I did arrive in Scotland almost completely unable to speak as a result of having sung Disney songs for 6 hours straight.
You and me are in the same sort of position at the moment.
Yeah. But no, they loved it, and they just loved beetling up and down the riverbank, and they were there when I caught my first fish of the week and when Misha caught her second fish, and they were beside themselves with excitement. So I think we've got a couple more young salmon anglers there.
If it was her first fish, did you knock it on the head?
No, we didn't. We'd had a bleeder earlier in the week, so we sort of thought that was our one for the week. We'd have liked to have put them all back, but my brother fought it too hard, so it had to go on the barbecue in the end.
And you're glad you just got that one into the pod.
Yeah.
Right, well, we've got a different style of pod this week, haven't we?
Yes, it's sort of special edition. So we're going to do things a bit differently. We don't often cover serious topics on the podcast.
But you may not be aware that there was an election recently.
There was. And so it's sort of all changed. And it's probably a good idea, we thought, just to sort of dig down into what having a new government is likely to mean for shooting in the wider countryside. And so because of that, and because it's quite a heavy topic and we want to do it justice, we're going to dispense with some of the sort of more silly elements to the podcast that we normally do. So we're not going to do any listener correspondence today. And also, because our guest is an extremely busy man, we're recording at 11:30 on a Thursday.
No, that's not the real reason. He is a very busy man, but it's the only way we could stop you drinking.
Yeah, so we're not having a drink. So there's no whose bird is it anyway, no unpopular opinions, and no what's that you're drinking. We're just going to get straight on with this.
As much as shooting is all about fun, having a laugh with your mates, there is a really important side to it. And yeah, occasionally we've got to discuss the things that are going to affect all of that going forward. So that's what today's about.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
So we've got a perfect guest for the topic. So why don't you go ahead and introduce him?
Yeah, so a few years ago, our guest today was studying countryside management at College, University of London. After that, he farmed in North Devon for 10 years. He's a wildfowler, game shot, all-round game shot, rough shooter, trout fisherman, salmon fisherman. So. He has worked for the Countryside Alliance since 2002, which was only a few years ago until recently. And now I look back and think, gosh, that's quite a while back now. A lot's happened since then. When he arrived, he was helping to deal with the media before the Liberty and Livelihood March, which was just over 20 years ago. And over the years, he's done every job there, basically. Press officer, campaigns director, and then was appointed chief exec in 2015. So he is, as you say, the best person to discuss politics and the countryside with. So put down your copy of the King's Speech and give a hearty hear, hear for Tim Bonner.
Morning. I'm not sure what's worse about that introduction. How it very clearly makes out how old I am, or whether the fact that you're doing a boring and heavyweight podcast is the first person you think of ringing is me. Either way, I'm sure we'll live through it.
Well, I mean, the real reason we wanted you, Tim, is because, as we said, we couldn't think of anybody who's better placed to give us and our listeners a proper kind of understanding of what this new Labour government is likely to mean for shooting in the countryside. There was some scary stuff in the manifesto, which has been quite well documented. And so, and of course, you never quite know what else might come down the road. So somebody with your experience, I think is absolutely key for us to be able to share that with our listeners. So thank you very much for making the time to join us.
No, it was fine, and it's funny, really. The alliance was created in 1997 as a response to the election of a Labour government with a massive majority, and here we are many years later. But this is the situation we were created to deal with, essentially. I hope that a lot of the work, we'll probably talk about a lot of it as we go through this pod, that we've done over the years in relation to the Labour Party as well as other parties, that it all starts to bear fruit now, I remain relentlessly optimistic about everything, but especially about game shooting.
Well, I think it's very important that we remain optimistic and we don't sort of all panic and rush about. But I think most of our listeners are going to be familiar with the Countryside Alliance, but they might not fully understand what the Countryside Alliance's role is in that kind of rural to Westminster relations side of things. Maybe you could just give a bit of a sort of explanation as to what it is that you guys do in that regard.
Yes, certainly. I mean, fundamentally, we're a campaigning and lobbying organisation. That's our raison d'etre. I always use the example of our office, which I have one rule about it: we have to be in walking distance to Westminster. That says a lot about what we do. And there are wonderful organisations we work really closely with who create evidence of the benefits of shooting and other activities, who are brilliant membership services organisations. Our niche, our USP, is undoubtedly the fact that we live and breathe politics and we understand it. We have a huge range of contacts across the political spectrum, and that role is as critical now today as it has ever been.
And so for the uninitiated, for the people who don't understand the inner workings and machinations of Westminster, what does lobbying look like from the Countryside Alliance's perspective? Who are you talking to? What are you talking to them about? Taking them out for dinner? What are you doing?
Lobbying is about relationships, as is good PR, as is good media management. It's about relationships and understanding the essence of politics, which is that that politicians have to deliver something. Whether they're in opposition, more so when they're in government, they have to deliver something, and their decisions will be based largely on the route of least pain. And if you can find a soft spot, a sweet spot, where your interests and the interests of politicians are in the same place, then you will most likely be successful. And that means having a very good relationship with them. I've met Steve Reed, who's the new DEFRA secretary, on several occasions. Daniel Zeichner, who's his number two, has been in a rural brief for longer, and again, we have a good relationship with. They're aware of our concerns. We're aware of what they have to deliver, and trying to ensure that as much as possible. And sometimes it isn't, but as much as possible that you can find a route of least pain for them, which also allows us to continue to do the things we want to do and to continue to protect our way of life. That's the essence of this whole business.
So how often would you see each of those guys? Because obviously they're busy blokes and got lots going on, and even more so today, I suppose. So yeah, would you see them on a monthly basis or?
Yeah, probably depending on the issues that are afoot. If you've got a live legislative issue, and you have a minister who's in charge of that piece of legislation, then and there are issues of debate and which are ongoing, then you might see them on a very regular basis. Sometimes, and this was the same for the last government. Sometimes, things are rolling on quite happily. There isn't anything that you've got to there. So that relationship may be more just about coming across them at a party conference or in the general day-to-day run of Westminster meetings. But the other great advantage the Alliance have, and the reason the reason the Alliance exists in the form it does is that we do campaign over a whole range of rural issues. And that does lend itself to credibility. We need to be really honest about that. It is very difficult. Many great colleagues who work essentially for single issue organisations. And for them, quite often, there won't be a live issue. And you are coming from a position where you're representing one single group of people on one issue. We have, I have the benefit of those who created the Alliance. And if we're not talking about shooting or hunting or one of these more controversial issues, we probably will be talking about the fact that we still haven't got rural broadband to where it should be, or how are we going to deal with access to public services for rural communities? And having that broad agenda helps us hugely, I think, when it comes to the tough stuff.
Yeah, I mean, rural broadband's a fascinating one because, one of the reasons we don't do this as a video podcast when we're recording from home is that my internet connection, literally 2 miles outside Winchester, simply isn't good enough. Sometimes even for the audio podcast, but definitely not for video podcasting.
And it is so recent that we've started to get proper broadband. I mean, since we started the pod about halfway through, I then ended up getting up fibre at home. It changed my life. It really does, and it's such a big deal these days. So the relationship thing you talk about is fascinating because, my first question: does the colour of government change how hard it is, or because of to build relationships, or because of the fact you were talking about, you represent a wide bunch of issues to do with the countryside? Does it mean that they're always going to be speaking to you, or do you have to work that much harder with a maybe less favourable government?
Oh yeah, I mean, let's be honest, you've got to work a lot harder. Half the last, just take shooting issues. Half the last cabinet shot. This is.
So they want to talk to you, but therefore that suggests, when you say you've got to work a lot harder, that suggests that a Labour government just simply isn't interested in these issues.
No, it's certainly not high on their agenda. They're not. This isn't stuff that makes them tick. This isn't in the core, the heart of the Labour agenda. Rural issues aren't quite there, but you've got people who are being appointed to roles. They will deal with you. They have to deal with you, and as well as you have a reasonable approach. And as I say, we have the joy of having this broad agenda, so many of the issues that we talk about do cut across into sort of core Labour principles. When we're talking about affordable housing in rural communities, that's as important to a Labour minister as anyone else. So it is harder because we need to be honest as well. Even after the last election, if you polled the listeners to this podcast or the members of the Countryside Alliance, we'd still find a minority voted for Labour. Far less so than the national vote as a whole, I'm quite sure. But that doesn't mean that these people won't engage, and it's just so important to remove yourself from tribal politics. And that's probably the most challenging thing, especially when a membership organisation like ours. And I took a lot of stick back in 2018 when I commissioned a report with the Fabians, who are a big Labour think tank, on Labour in the countryside and how Labour needed to change their approach in order to win in rural constituencies. And there's a lot of our own members, some of our own board members, who couldn't understand that this wasn't about supporting Labour. It was about ensuring that our agenda and our interests were understood within the Labour Party. And I think now people have come around to that, and the fact that Keir Starmer, people like Steve Reid, the now DEFRA secretary, are using almost exactly the language of that report. 5 years later, as they were campaigning and seeking to mop up the rural vote, which they did very successfully, shows that that has had an impact.
It's interesting when you say it's that much harder, because it's kind of sad in a way, because you've got a DEFRA minister. Surely the issues that the Countryside Alliance stand for should be as prevalent, no matter what the government is, for a DEFRA minister, or for anyone focused on the rural area.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I certainly my comments weren't a criticism of those Labour ministers. We just got to understand where the Labour Party comes from. It is fundamentally, its core is more urban than the Conservative Party. The interests of its elected MPs are different to those of most elected Conservative MPs. And you look at the contrast in the cabinet and in the just on our issues, on our sort of core rural issues. But I personally I found prior to the election, I found the shadow team very approachable. Steve Reed actually spoke at a conference we organised, a Future Countryside conference during the election campaign, and he was willing to come along, drop his election campaign in order to do that. So I find them very approachable, but we just have to understand that these issues have a different status as far as the Labour Party is concerned, and on a few of them, essentially they become management issues inside Labour. We're not here to talk about hunting particularly, but hunting as an issue it's more about the management of the Labour Party and the left versus right and all the rest of it than it is anything to do with the countryside or a pack of hounds. And some shooting issues will tip over into that whole sort of left-right argument as well.
So I want to get into some specific issues and that sort of thing in a minute or two, but I just think just before we go on, again on this lobbying point, I think it'd be really helpful for people to understand, because I think some people think, well, you should mostly be doing your campaigning in the press, in the media, and try and change opinion that way. Can you give us an example of a time when sort of behind-the-scenes lobbying has changed a policy or headed a policy off at the pass or had a positive outcome in terms of rural issues?
Perhaps I'll give an example, best perhaps not directly related to our own work, but I think it's a really important example. And it's one that I use increasingly as an example. Take the NFU campaign to get a badger cull to tackle bovine TB. Yeah, there was a specific decision made there not to run almost an anti-campaign, an anti-PR campaign. There was, they're asked the question, do you want to make a case? Do you want to write a company? No. We have science, we have the law, we have facts. That's what we rely on. And we have to be aware, especially with some of the more difficult issues that we're going to come on and talk about some of them, that traditional model, the idea that somehow you could make the case for culling badgers and you can persuade the public that it's the thing that should be done, is just not going to happen. We need to be really honest about that. And actually, we ran a campaign in Scotland which lasted for about 8 years when the Scottish government said it wanted to review hunting legislation in Scotland. And we took the view that it is not possible to have a sensible debate about hunting in public in Scotland. It just wasn't there.
Well, this is the Guy Adams view that in some circumstances, the less frequently shooting and hunting and so on are in the papers, the better it is.
Absolutely. And that's quite a challenging message to our own community sometimes. I take it, I front up probably more than I should for my health sometimes. but this idea that, classically the idea that we can persuade everyone that game shooting is a good thing. Let's be really frank about it. We're killing animals for sport. And that is a really challenging issue for the vast majority of the public. And everyone sitting around this table, everyone this podcast can justify that to themselves, and that's why we do it. And we know that the benefits outweigh, any potential issues as far as welfare is concerned and all that. But that's not how the vast majority of the public feel. So what is the best? What is the best result? The best result is that we do things so well to a high standard that we're not in the newspapers, that we're not being challenged. And one of hunting's big problems, if we're going to use the comparison at the moment, is that it hasn't managed to do that over the last few years, which is why there are sort of some fairly fundamental commitments on hunting in the Labour manifesto, and there's not much at all on shooting, in my view, certainly.
It's tough, this examples of work that come off, because when you were saying earlier about building relationships, the first thing you don't do is then talk about that relationship with other people. Because it sort of undermines the fact that you've sort of built this relationship. I imagine that's really tricky from your sort of PR work to then say, well, look, I was at dinner with this guy last week and this is what we discussed. He's never going to meet you for dinner again.
Yeah, of course.
So I'm not going to ask you to confirm or deny, but I think that we can infer, for example, the fact that shooting was on a list of permitted activities when lockdowns were lifted.
Oh, the rule of six.
The rule of six, all that sort of stuff. I mean, there's no way in hell that wasn't as a result of some pretty serious work behind that. And I'm not even going to look at Tim because I'm not going to ask him to commit.
If you looked at the COVID inquiry and some of the WhatsApp messages there, you'd have just put it like this: there was stuff from our chairman there. It was commented on at the time.
That's a classic example where a word in someone's ear and the right person, because of relationship, changes something around instantly. I mean, that was huge when that got reversed. Because it wasn't on the list, was it? until midnight.
No, and it had to be done very carefully. Even as it was, there was plenty of comment around grouse shooting and that sort of thing.
Pushback, wasn't there?
But we knew, we all know that the sector absolutely had to have that. It would have been disastrous otherwise.
And if that had been COVID now with the now Labour government, I assume it wouldn't have got on the list.
It would have been very challenging, certainly.
I mean, genuinely devastating if it hadn't got on.
Well, yeah, let's not prejudge. I hope we would have been able to make the case. I'm, as I say, always relentlessly optimistic.
Well, Octopush was on it, wasn't it?
I was going to say Octopush community was thrilled.
I mean, it was friends. The biggest thing that ever happened to Octopush was getting included on the Rule of Six.
It was, a bizarre time. And I think there's been a lot of work, for instance, done in the run-up to the publication of the Labour Manifesto, which was a critical moment as well. And all I'd say to people, again, we don't have to go into too much detail, but look at the 2019 Labour Manifesto and look at the 2023 Labour Manifesto. They are very different things, and that did not happen by accident.
Well, and then this is absolutely key. So moving on to the policies that they have talked about, it does feel to me, I mean, they couldn't be really much more central from a Labour point of view. They really have adjusted since 2019. Is it fair to say this government's hostile towards shooting?
I think they would say, and I think there's perfect good justification to support what they said. They've been saying this, that no, they're not. And Steve Reed's been very clear. He said that they've got no intention at all of legislating against legitimate shooting, game shooting.
So what are the key points from a shooting person's point of view that we need to be aware of over the sort of next 4 years, say, in this term?
Well, we've got some... It's sort of Donald Rumsfeld's territory, but we've got some known knowns. We have probably three specific issues that are touched on in the manifesto. The first is a ban on snares. Weirdly, they call them snare traps in the manifesto. I'm quite sure that comes from. There is what's described as full cost recovery in relation to firearms licensing. I'm sure we'll come on to discuss that more, but essentially it would mean that we'd be paying an awful lot more for a firearms license.
Is it firearms license and shotgun certificates?
Yes,
So that's a catch-all term.
Sorry, it's a catch-all term to cover everything. And the third one would be the potential for an impact on game shooting from legislation on hunting, and that would be specifically about the terrier work exemption, which is an exemption for the use of dogs below ground to protect game birds for no other reason, and the potential for that to be removed, whilst the manifesto has actually moved back from where it was, which was quite specific about that in 2019. It's not now, and there's a big ruck going on in the animal rights movement. They're very angry, a lot of them, with the Labour Party and what they see as backpedaling. But there still could be an impact there. So that's the stuff that's out there. Beyond that, and probably in reality more potentially dangerous in relation to shooting, are a range of issues which wouldn't necessarily need primary legislation, although they could have primary legislation, because the manifesto is only, it is only the stuff they will do. It's not all the stuff they'll do. And even the King's speech yesterday.
Is it really the stuff they will do, or the stuff they'd like to do?
It's the stuff they
intend to do, or the stuff they stand for, the stuff they like.
Yeah, well, Chris, we're going to have to be realistic about this Parliament. They've got over 400 Labour MPs. They've got discipline. This isn't a Tory party tearing itself apart. They can do whatever they want to do. That is the first lesson of this Parliament.
And they've also got House of Lords, which is just going to let stuff fly.
And if it's in the manifesto, the stuff we just discussed, then there's a thing called the Salisbury Convention, and the House of Lords won't stand in the way of that anyway. So, for instance, not that I think they would, but the House of Lords is not going to turn around and say, no, you can't ban snares. Because that's the convention is very clearly that the government's been elected with a manifesto commitment to do that, and the House of Lords will let it do that. So those issues wouldn't. But the big issues, potentially beyond that, are especially around the licensing of release of pheasants and partridges, I think, and that stuff, and we and potentially licensing of grouse shooting as well. And we always say, look to Cardiff, look to Edinburgh, look what's happening elsewhere. And the example, we know where where the Welsh government and NRW are going with licensing the release of pheasants and partridges, and there will be a lot of pressure from the animal rights movement and the left of the party for ministers to go in the same direction here, and that's the second phase, if you like.
So I'm trying to keep count of the things I want to touch upon, because that's kind of the fourth thing. What happened in Wales, a slight backpedaling. Where's that going to go from here? So bring it back to the start of the things that you mentioned: snares, humane cable restraints, snare traps. What do you expect?
The commitment's quite straightforward. I think we will argue with our colleagues in Aim to Sustain, who are all signed up to this, that the prohibition on snares, non-compliant snares, which aren't wholly illegal at the moment, is something that we can all sign up to. We have no problem with that. But we will argue, I'm fairly confident, the Alliance certainly will, and I think we'll argue as a sector, that cable restraints, humane cable restraints are fundamentally different. They are not snare traps, and that the government should look to license those, the continued use of those, not least because of the potential impact on some of the most threatened species in the country. And if you want to talk about nature recovery, you want to talk about curlews and grey partridges and lapwings and all this sort of stuff, and you are removing another tool at the same time you're removing another tool, upland keepers in particular, but not just upland keepers. We know how important humane cable restraints are to those who are seeking to increase breeding populations of waders, particularly in the lowlands as well. As a government, you have to consider whether there is any logic in this, because it looks to us as if there isn't. Now, that will be really challenging, not least because we already have an example in Wales and an example in Scotland where there has been a complete and total blanket ban. But those will be the arguments we will make.
Presumably that just means data gathering is absolutely going full force in those areas to try and prove that they've made a mad decision.
Yeah, that'd be critical. And the GWCT does fantastic work on this. The evidence is there, it's really sound. But let's be honest, the Labour government in Wales, they wouldn't even discuss it. Wouldn't even really engage on that issue.
It is mad, because we know how important these things are. Forget shooting. We just know how important these things are for the environment generally, predator control. And I mean, and as favourable as some of these Labour ministers are, there's a lot of education to occur. I have heard of a particular story where they are keen to learn, but they were walking around some grown crop in springtime or early summer and talking about culling, fox control, and the gamekeeper in question was sort of pointing out to them, but how am I supposed to shoot a fox in that wheat when you can't see it? And they were like, oh yeah. And you think, these are people that are in charge of these key decisions, and they just don't understand at all. There's so much learning that's got to occur. My major concern is that decisions are made before that learning takes place.
Yeah, and I touched at the beginning of this discussion on those issues which are really about welfare, countryside management, rest of it, and those which are part of the management of the internal management of the Labour Party. And snaring has been on the animal rights agenda. It's been high on that list for a long time. There is trophy hunting's. We haven't talked about that. It's slightly separate, but trophy hunting is in the manifesto as well. Again, that's just on that list, that animal rights list, and there will be a perception within those who are involved in managing the Labour Party, managing MPs, that you've got to give them something. And look, the Scots have banned snaring, the Welsh have banned snaring. We can do that, and it keeps them happy. It's that cynical. But that's politics, and that's the game, and that's what you need to understand.
That's a thing that will need primary legislation to outlaw the use of the traps, though. So what sort of time frame are we likely to be looking at? Because I didn't see it in...
Surely they've got enough on their plate. Like, what are they thinking?
Well, for example, there wasn't I don't think there is an environment bill in the King's speech.
Well, this was encouraging in the King's speech yesterday. There wasn't, there was barely a mention of the countryside at all. There was a tiny bit on farming, and it was irrelevant.
Yeah, but we do need to remember, and I think our response was very clear, that the cost of living crisis and the economic issues that are affecting the country as a whole, impact every single person in the countryside too. So you're standing back and looking for exceptionalism. I was encouraged to an extent in that, there was no mention of hunting. I didn't expect it, to be honest, because exactly as you just said, Chris, the really damaging argument here is about priorities. If after 14 years of opposition, if you come in and the first stuff you're talking about,
want to do is to give
and
the
they've got VAT on private schools, and they've got getting rid of hereditary peers there, so there's enough class war stuff to keep it happy for a bit.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I think this is stuff that we'll see down the line, but also, and perhaps this is a good place to mention this, because I think we need to be aware of the different routes of attack. Yes, there's government legislation, we've got commitments and manifestos, but you will see, especially because you've got a lot of Labour MPs, many of whom will have very little to do in Parliament, to be honest, you will see all sorts of other routes being sought out in order to push forward these issues on the agenda. Now, for instance, the private members' ballot will be drawn next week, and the top half dozen people in that will have a very good chance of putting something right at the top of the legislative agenda. And if they can get sort of government acceptance and support, then that bill might even become law. And we're very aware that there may well be an attempt, for instance, to preempt government legislation on hunting. In that private members' ballot, it's always used as a tactic. It may be that someone picks up and says, "Well, I'm going to bring forward a motion to ban snaring." Government says it's going to do it. Well, so we'll just push it along. So there are all sorts of different routes, and the other route, and one of the reasons I was actually quite pleased, as you said, Chris, there was very little on. There was very little DEFRA legislation and no specific animal welfare legislation. As soon as we see a piece of animal welfare legislation, there will be amendments to address snaring, to address hunting, to address all these other things as well. There will be a constant battle throughout this Parliament, because there are at least a significant number of Labour MPs and others, not just Labour, whom these issues, these animal rights issues, if we put them like that list are, it's their agenda, and they will be looking for every opportunity to push that forward.
I think we better talk about the firearms licensing thing, because I think that's probably the single biggest bit of legislation that we can expect pretty shortly. Now, that I think I'm right in saying doesn't require primary legislation, so that could just be a sort of rule change that's signed off.
Yeah, well, there's a review. There's actually an extant review at the moment of firearms fees. There are processes that can happen outside primary legislation. And this comes back to rules which go well beyond firearms or shooting. There's a rule which the Conservative Party brought in about licensing generally, that there should be full cost recovery, i.e. those who apply for licenses for things should cover the cost of the bureaucracy of delivering those licenses. And fundamentally, that's something that it's very difficult to argue with. The challenge for us is that, for two reasons, if we went to full cost recovery on firearms licenses at the moment, we would be taking our fees from tens of pounds to hundreds of pounds. And it's difficult to argue. Chris and I were talking earlier that Labour have identified £22 million, they say, annually.
So there's how many shotgun licence holders?
That's say 600,000.
Including firearms?
Yeah, 600,000-ish.
Okay, so 600,000, 22 million divided by 600,000.
But we're renewing every 5 years. So
divided by 120,000.
Yeah.
On top of, so that's 183 quid.
That's 183 quid more
than a cost of a new application or a renewal. But the renewals are also hugely variable by. Aren't they variable by police force?
No, there's one set fee. The variation comes when you go to your doctor, which is separate, which is an additional element to the cost of licensing, which is separate anyway.
And we've seen 3 to 200 quid.
Yeah, absolutely.
On that. The problem with part of this argument is there's a lot of people in the system at the moment who know how bad the current renewal or application process is. I was on the phone to a member who rang the other day who was he's come over from Canada and just literally just can't get any form of response. And Patrick Galbraith, who's guest on the pod a lot and writer on Scripan, he's been dealing with the Met a lot recently, and it's just become an actual joke. They just don't reply to emails. So we're well aware that the system needs overhaul and it needs some sort of sophistication, because there's going to be something going wrong soon, because there's going to be stuff falling through the cracks because it's so badly run. So we do need to redo it, but full cost recovery therefore means you're looking at probably 250 quid a head.
Yeah. Yep.
So what's the Alliance's line then on this particular bit of policy?
Well, as I said, it's very difficult to argue with the concept of full cost recovery, but it's very easy, as Chris has just pointed out, to argue that the system that we are being forced to use is inefficient, ludicrously bureaucratic. I mean, just the simple fact that there's 42 separate licensing authorities. Imagine if we all still had to go to our local police to license our car. It's madness.
It is laughable.
It's hugely inefficient. And one very simple example, you could halve the cost of that overnight by taking a license from 5 years to 10 years. We get a passport for 10 years. You get a driving license till you're 75, I think, isn't it? I'm not that old yet, so I don't. But and we have this continuous assessment, medical assessment, as part of the changes that have been agreed over the last decade or so with licensing as well, which is, I personally think it's a very positive thing, and it's something we should all welcome. So there's no justification for coming back every 5 years to do a license.
No, there isn't.
So do 10 years, you halve the number of licenses. We know all the backlogs in licensing departments. That alone could resolve all sorts of issues almost overnight.
Yeah, so if the doctor decides someone's a nutter within that 10-year period, they would lose their license.
Anyway, yeah, exactly. We all have a tag now.
Yeah.
We have that tag with our doctor. If you present and you've got and you're presenting in a way where we quite clearly have issues, then that's going to be reported back to the police, and police can make a decision about taking your license away. So it's a continuous assessment of your mental health. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But it also should mean that what should have come alongside that is then we can extend the license period, which resolves all sorts of things for firearms licensing departments, for the costs, for everything.
So that brings it back to sort of 120, 130 quid.
Yeah.
Which is a lot more palatable.
But
and if you're going to get
10 years rather than every 5.
And every 10 years, and if you're going to get a better system, I think we'd probably be happy with that. I mean, I know a lot of people recently have paid a lot more of that just to get the bloody thing sorted out, because a lot of guns are in gun shops and stuff, not where they want them, because they haven't, we're giving random exemptions or like extensions to certificates.
Which are illegal. Yeah, in many cases. The police are issuing illegal extensions to firearms.
But I'm sure I heard a story about someone who was given a letter that said he couldn't have a shotgun certificate, but he could buy cartridges. He presented that at the gun shop, and the gun shop went, "What's this? I'm not giving you any cartridges."
Literally in handwriting as well.
It's
signed off Gov.
I know. I mean, this may be a part as well. This, as I said, the fact that we've got 42 separate firearms licensing system in itself is insane. We know it's been centralised in Scotland, not because of changes to firearms licensing, but because of changes to the police, where you have one police force in Scotland now, and it's one of the more efficient. And the variation between forces is extraordinary. The British Shooting Sports Council did some work on the costs in different police forces, and it was ranging from something like £40 to £250.
And how the law is applied as well. That
Absolutely.
We constantly see these Devon and Cornwall police stories coming out. Charlie Jacobi's quite good at digging those up, isn't he?
I mean, but it seems to me then the obvious thing is just we're okay with the idea of overhaul of the system, but 10 years.
Yeah.
Absolutely no budging on
10
that.
10 years and a proper, efficient system. I mean, personally, and this is probably beyond all organisations in the sector yet. We haven't all sort of come to this, but I think we're moving to a point where we're saying, look, you've got a DVLA, well, let's have one system. Yeah. And that doesn't mean you don't have local firearms officers who are coming to do the checks in the same way as you can do your driving test in Aylesbury or in Norwich. You do that, but have one system which is effective, which is efficient, we know that, some of it isn't their fault, but even I managed to drown my license a few years back, and we were still on the point. I had to find a checkbook and write a check for £4 in order to get a new license.
Yeah, you do, don't you?
It's ludicrous.
So this is the thing. We accept that there is a need for a change in that. And so what do you think the chances would be to get a 10-year extension? I mean, everything you've said is entirely logical, but not that ever mattered to anyone.
I think the 10 years will be challenging because it will still be seen as somehow meaning that there's less scrutiny and monitoring. It doesn't, as we've said.
Well, he also needs his £22 million a year.
Yeah. But I think that it will be, I think it'll be very difficult for the government not to accept the argument of connecting the reform of the system and efficiency in the system and full cost recovery. They cannot expect us reasonably to pay for a ludicrously inefficient system.
Yeah. I think we might have got our maths wrong there, actually. If we extend it to 10 years, it doubles, doesn't it? Because you got less people renewing every year.
Yeah, exactly.
But the point is, I mean, I think we'd all be grateful to see a better system, but yeah, not the full cost recovery of sending in checks and someone who works between 10 and 3 Monday and Friday. I'll do your application then, which is literally the system we have at the moment.
Yeah. But I would put up a little bit of a red flag at this stage, which is that there is a significant lobby within Labour to, as they would say, strengthen, certainly make restrictions on gun ownership broadly, make it more difficult. And once we open Pandora's box in relation to firearms licensing
amendments,
it gives all sorts of opportunities. And we know there was the horrific incident in Plymouth a few years ago. Luke Pollard, who was the Shadow Air Force Secretary, he's actually a minister in EMOD now, but Luke has been campaigning for essentially for shotguns to be put on as Section 1 to change the status. I mean, that would make. I mean, that if you talk about bureaucracy, that would mean that would bring in a whole new level of bureaucracy. But there is a significant element there who want changes, and that's it's probably the secondary area in terms of firearms licensing. But there is the cost element. It's going to become more expensive. I think we got to be honest about that. But hopefully, we can attach some improvements to that. But especially if we go into a 2-term Labour government, which, frankly, given the numbers, is very likely, there will be continuing and significant pressure for widespread reform of firearms legislation, and that is only going to go one way. It's going to make life more difficult.
It's tough because we often have this debate in shooting circles about, is it better? Well, you've alluded to already, George, earlier, but is it better just to run away from the conversation, or try and shut the conversation down, or have the conversation and go for your what you'd like from it? And a lot of people, and the same applies with hunting. Like a lot of people don't want the conversation, don't want repeal. A few years back, and now let's go for a change in the law. And you can't have it both ways. You need to, at this point, make a decision. So, is it go for the conversation, try and control it?
I think we have to have a continuing conversation. I think where this may end up, and this is really a speculation, rather than looking at taking shotguns into Section 1, which would be a bureaucratic nightmare. It would mean that every gun would be licensed separately, and we know
600,000 people have to reapply.
Exactly,
I mean, that's going to be. You think the delays are bad now?
And I think there were. Someone told me one police force alone is doing 4,000 amendments to shotgun ownership. And if those all became variations of a license as they are with firearms, it would create carnage. Frankly, there is the issue that has been pushed is the issue around necessity. And as we know, when you apply for your firearms license, you give a reason why you want that, and then you have to be able to show that you're a member of a club, or you have ground on which you can stalk, or whatever that is. And I think where we may see this moving is towards a discussion about having to justify why you should be allowed to have a shotgun, rather than it being something that you have unless they can provide a reason that you don't. So a shift in that burden. I think we would all immediately argue that's unnecessary, and the issues that we have with misuse of legal shotguns don't really relate to that stuff. Mostly relate to failures in the licensing system. But it is a valid discussion. I think we have to be honest about that, and it may be something we have to engage with if that is if that's where we end up in 5 or 10 years. But I really am horizon scanning at this stage.
So on the topic of horizon scanning, then you mentioned the sort of the potential things that may come down the line in terms of licensing of grouse shooting, the licensing of game bird releasing. Obviously, there's nothing in the manifesto about it, but doesn't mean to say it's not on the agenda. Is there anything that you guys can do at this stage to try and either head that off at the pass, or try and steer it in a direction that is, the least worst option kind of thing? We had Ross, talking about that, and it seemed like they were able to not get ahead of it, but to sort of steer things in a direction that made them less.
I mean, it's been a bit
bad.
Interesting recently. They only just launched the portal, didn't they? And they called it the Grouse-Moor portal. Grouse-Moor, one word. I thought it was interesting. I mean, it tells you a lot about where they're coming from.
We've been fighting battles around licensing the use of more than 2 dogs in Scotland alongside SLEs. The introduction of the grouse licensing as well. But I think in broad terms, it is that very pragmatic approach which we've taken on issues up there. And we work closely with SLE, our Scottish team. And they have the experience of working with governments which are not entirely friendly. That's what they've had to have for the last. And you do have to be pragmatic. Yeah. Standing there and stamping your feet when you've got the size of majority Labour have got in Westminster now. This is a different world, and we've however long we've seen it coming, and however inevitable it's been, the reality starts now. And that is the situation. So we are going to have to accept, as I said earlier, they can do what they want to do. Our job is to try to mitigate that and ensure that whatever it is they would do, we can live with.
As an organisation, does that put you in a tricky position? Because I'm just thinking about the response to the lead phase out thing, which was at face value a sensible attempt to get ahead of something that was inevitably coming down the line, and the level of vitriol that was levelled at the organisations as a result of that must have been pretty challenging to deal with. And so when you're saying, well, this is inevitable, so we're going to try and mitigate it, rather than just saying, no, we don't want to, and campaigning on those lines, do you get pushback from the members? Do you see a sort of negativity from within the countryside community about the fact that you've taken that stance?
Oh yeah, and let's be honest. There's an element of our world to whom change of any sort is unacceptable. It is just that simple. And I find I keep talking about being older. As I get older and probably even less wise, I do find people talk a lot about PR. And PR starts with one thing and one thing alone. It's actually what you do. It is what you do and how you behave. And getting people to understand that, and getting people to understand that the outcomes, legislative outcomes, almost entirely, heavily rely on what we do, how we present ourselves, and the arguments we make as a community. It's going back to what we talked earlier about Guy Adams' point about no news being good news. It is, I think we can get through. I think we can get through the next 5 or 10 years, and we'll still be shooting at the end of it in a way that's very similar to that. There probably will be. We'll probably, as we said, be paying more for our firearms license, and we may have the restrictions, and things might be more difficult. But we will still be doing that. But I can't guarantee that, because I can promise you, if we have a series of ridiculous actions by people which are highlighted, which are on the front page of the newspapers, which are on the news at 10, then we will end up with legislation. Look at Scotland. We've just been talking about Scotland and grouse. Scotland and grouse shooting is about one thing and one thing alone, and that's people killing golden eagles. Yeah, that's it. If that hadn't happened, there would be no licensing of grouse in Scotland, and there will be,
And this is the lesson from hunting as well, right? Which is they've now got their head on the chopping block, and that's it, right? But they had the chance to prevent that from happening, and for whatever reasons, but they managed to not stay out of the papers. So there's a lesson here for everybody listening, right? Everybody, we can rely on our organizations who do a lot of great work. They've got the contacts and so on and so forth. But actually, if we are, as a community, making it indefensible,
we have to take responsibility.
So shoots, guns have to take responsibility. Shoots have to be following the Code of Good Shooting Practice in terms of their release pens and the numbers of birds they're releasing and this kind of stuff, so that it doesn't look completely unpalatable. Yeah. If you're leaving a shoot day and you're chucking your brace of pheasants in the hedge, you need a sharp punch to the nose, because you're going to be the one who screws it up for the rest of us.
You're absolutely right. It's the little comment. It's the little things that happen like that which carry so much. That just undo all the hard work, and it is infuriating, and it's been fascinating watching. I don't hunt, but obviously I massively stand for it and all that sort of stuff. But whether it's a bad law or not, the law was made, and therefore you have to try and work with that. And I think the lead argument is just one of these things at the moment. This resistance to change, I think, under a Tory government, maybe you could sometimes argue we should just resist all change, we might get away with it. I think that's just completely gone, as you've just alluded to. And it does keep coming back to the community being the most important thing right now. It's not in our hands, but kind of largely is.
Oh, it is. It is in our hands. I don't think it's not in our hands. And it's still in hunting's hands. Hunting could change perception. It's not going to happen. Legislation is not going to happen this year.
Do you not think the horse is bolted on that one?
There will be legislation. It's a question now of what, not whether, but what is huge. What can mean legislation which will make it almost impossible to take a dog out in the countryside, or it can mean that
that's
people
what they were talking about, wasn't it?
No, they've actually backtracked. There's a very interesting fracas going on in the anti-hunting world at the moment because they're furious with the Labour Party because they've backtracked on what the anti-hunting movement.
Because some of the legislation could be it is illegal to be on the horseback in the presence of dogs. Right, that could be the
not quite.
It's a bit of a ridiculous example, but
it's with vicarious liability territory and all that sort of thing. Where
that's the only way they can try and sew it up, isn't it? Because it feels like any way of legislating against this is going to end up with something which is another bad law.
Well, yeah, I mean, that the trouble is where you start from, isn't it? But to take your lead example, I do. You know, Chris, because we've talked about it lots of times. I do find it the most extraordinary and frustrating thing because it is the easiest thing on earth we can do to show that we're environmentally aware, that we understand, that we shouldn't be using a toxic material when we don't have to, and we don't bloody have to.
Yeah,
it is just so straightforward. As a wildfowler, I've been killing stuff with steel for 25 years. I do feel a bit of guilt now, actually, about the fact I was lobbing plastic wads out into the estuary while I was doing that for quite a long period of that.
But that was then, and this is now.
We have that solution as well now. And I've been shooting with steel with nothing else for 3 or 4 years, and it's absolutely fine. There's no the nonsense we hear.
I'm starting to get quite outspoken on this because I've had some really awkward conversations with friends about it over the last few years, and even clients, because it's a really dangerous game for us. We take money from advertisers, gun companies, and all sorts, and obviously they would love no change. I've never quite understood it because surely the best thing to do is get everyone coming and buying new guns from me. But anyway, but the point now is, like, given how far it's moving, now that this government's come in with all the things we've just discussed, like, it really feels to me like, and I know that it does have quite a big impact on high bird shooting, like. And we're talking quite extreme high bird shooting, but that's such a different can of worms.
Bring them down by 10 yards. It's still just as difficult.
It's so nuanced, and there's such a huge economic value to a lot of those really big shoots, as we know. They're all clients of ours as well. But at the same time, like, we have to stand back from this and go, where's it going to end up? And we've got to. I'm so strong on this now. We just got to change. We have to. We've got to move and, like, just get on with it. And the number of shoots I've spoken to over the last sort of maybe 6-9 months who say, it feels like, we're doing a bit more lead again. And you're like, what? Like, why? I just don't get it.
But I mean, this comes back to what we were saying in the last episode with Charlie, right? Which is shooting has a tendency to look backwards. The countryside in general has a tendency to look backwards. It was all much better back then. And actually what we need to do is to look forwards. Farming, shooting, hunting, fishing to a lesser extent, all of these activities have pretty poor PR at present. And if we keep harking back to how it used to be, then we're not making the progressive changes that we need to make that will improve that PR image. And so as much as we might all want no change, we might want it to all be, like we said, no change since 1921, that isn't going to happen. And I think realism is the thing that is often lacking in the sort of romantic, misty-eyed vision we all have of the countryside. Let's be realistic about what is achievable.
Yeah, and also the idea that no change. Hold on. We've been through so much change in regard to shooting. Shooting was not like this. So we have changed it, and everyone's sort of forgotten that we changed it. And then we don't want it to change, but we did. So why don't we just go back? And actually, that's kind of where we want it. Where we think it's defensible.
And going back to your original question was about, it's difficult with members and the rest of it. I'm actually, really positive about the fact that the majority of our members, majority of people who shoot, I think, majority of people who hunt are progressive. They see it. They see the logic. And there's a noisy element for all of, and I've taken some quite strong positions since I've been chief exec. So never scared of that, probably unwise at times. And for all the noise and the stuff that's been thrown at me, never seen any real impact in terms of membership. There's no sort of blip as they all fall off the wall or anything like that. You get people shout at me and they say, well, it's ludicrous. I've been eating pheasants shot with lead all my life, and look at me, I'm perfectly normal. So, as they twitch.
That's my favourite argument, because one of the big impacts that it can have, lead, is in kids, it can damage your IQ. It can reduce your IQ, and I'm like, you do realise you're basically just saying you're less bright than you might otherwise have been. And the very fact that you're saying that to me indicates that you've not fully grasped the argument here.
But actually, coming back to Labour Party, we all know that lead will be prohibited probably to 2029, sometime around there. We're going to get 5 years. The idea now that you somehow Labour is going to go on a slow track to prohibition of lead ammunition and sort of fall out behind Europe as they do. It's just nonsense. This is going to happen, boys and girls. There is, and it has been going to happen for 10 years. It's been completely inevitable, which is why we take the position we had. And I'm actually really proud, going back to that point, because for all the stick we took, especially from shotgun cartridge manufacturers, the fact is now that there is a viable steel option with a biodegradable wad available for nearly every type and sort of shooting that you would want to do. And that would not have happened if we hadn't done what we had done. I am certain of that.
You're absolutely right. And on the point that, we've got a few more years, I'll keep shooting lead. The guys who make the guns and make the cartridges are mates of ours. They're mates of yours. They're mates of everyone. They're all friends of the shooting community. Don't give them so much of a headache that we have to instantly flip over. And the game dealers and all of the chain, the supply chain that happens either side of the shooting point, don't wait until the last minute. Let's just get as many people transferring now so that it's not a problem, because otherwise we're just going to give ourselves a problem. We know a problem is coming, just let's get ahead of it.
Yeah. And it is frankly ludicrous that we have supermarkets who want to sell game and they cannot source non-lead shot game in order to be able to sell it. I mean, let's talk about the PR of shooting for what that one issue apart from anything else. I mean, that is mindless.
Yeah, and when you talk about social license, the idea that you've seen a pheasant when you were doing your weekly shop is so important, because it keeps it in the mind. And so many people say, but it's not a big outlet for game. Oh my God, that's not the point.
Well, before Chris has a coronary, I think, and I know you've got to get away, Tim. So I've got one last question for you before we go to desert island shooting, and it's a bit of a toughie. But we are in a new era. If you could give the shooting community, by which I mean the Guns on Pegs podcast listeners, it's the same thing. What's the one message you would give the shooting community to think about for the length of this parliament for the next 5 years, to make sure that shooting is in as good a place as it can be next time there's an election?
You do things right, and we'll have your back. I mean, I think that it is that simple. And if we have if we can get through this period without people doing spectacularly stupid things, without issues becoming hot political topics, without giving our enemies the ammunition, then I am very confident that we will, as I say, whether it's 5, 10, 15 years, we will still be shooting. And we might be having to get general licenses for the release of pheasants. We certainly will be in Wales, because that's where let's go. The rest of it, there might be more challenges, but we will still be shooting in the way we are now. The route to doom, and it's an example, Chris, you've laid out sadly, in to an extent in the hunting world, although I think things are retrievable there, is to continue to do the same stupid things, and we can't do that. And I think shooting, I'm very positive about shooting. I think its rep is not bad at all. We do have the challenge of the RSPB and the environmental movement and their approach to it, but we can improve things, and we've got we've got a good story to tell. So let's keep it straight. Think about the shooting you're buying. Think about, ask the questions. Don't be shy. Ask why you're not shooting with lead. We'll move on from that one. And if we can uphold those standards, do things properly, that the chances of cataclysmic legislation are much reduced.
Yeah. I think to add to that, I think, yes, shooting is fun, and that's okay. Is a really important sort of starting point. So think about where you go, what you do, and how it looks. And just if each person just thought about those things, the amount of change in a positive sense would just be amazing. Because there's so many silly little things that we do, and partly because no one's ever sort of questioned it. And you think, wow, a little bit of a change here, a little bit of a change there makes such a big difference, whether it's the environment or I don't know, like loads of different things.
I think that's a really good. I think most people are shooting they're spending their money to shoot, right? And I think the question that every gun should be asking themselves when they buy a shoot day or when they sign up to their syndicate or whatever, and you think, if you ask yourself the question, could I defend what happens at this place to somebody who doesn't particularly care one way or the other, but has doubts? Like, if you can put hand on heart and say, the way this shoot operates, I am comfortable with, and it would be tough to argue with, then I think you're in a pretty good place. And
exactly.
It's about individual responsibility as much as it is group responsibility.
Yeah. Well, that did pick up positive-wise. There was a little bit more positivity towards the end there. But let's finish with some real positivity. And with this desert island shooting, whatever he says, I'm going with him, okay? Because I'm in that frame of mind right now. So, Tim, as with all our pods, the extinction level event asteroid hits tomorrow. Your affairs are in order. Loved ones and enemies reconciled. Your dogs are fed. All your children looked after, and your tomatoes are watered. Your last day shooting begins how?
Well, I was really torn with this, and because I've been really lucky in life to have some extraordinary shooting experiences, and they are experiences really. I've shot woodcock out of the heather on the Isle of Lewis, which is just a fabulous, fabulous pastime. I've had some phenomenal shooting in the far north, wildfowling, snipe shooting, that sort of thing. But I'd probably, I'm heading down the M4. I'm going across the bridge to Wales, and I'm going to a little marsh in Carmarthenshire. It's not that little, actually, quite a big marsh, where one of my greatest friends and I shot very regularly, often with our boys, with our lads, and we have had some utterly tremendous sport down there. And the great thing is, we're in waders. We've got our own dogs. There's not a beater in sight because we're our beaters. We've got our fingers crossed because when things are right, it's just phenomenal. And the number of snipe, golden plover, and the duck that come later on that marsh are just incredible. But the joy of it will being with great mates in a place we know so well, and our dogs will work hard and get wet. We'll get sweaty. We'll fall in because you always fall in somewhere along the line. And having walked the rushes through the wet stuff, taken some extraordinary snipe. It's impressive how far a snipe will come down from, because a snipe at 50 yards or 40 yards is a little dot in the air.
Yeah.
And so, I'll never forget being down there and the boys just latching into them, and we were pushing them. They always go into the wind, pushing them over out of a big flooded field of rushes, and they were taking off over this hedge. One beater is great. You just work your way quietly around, and they were coming over and over. And I was watching these things come out of the sky, and you just think, I couldn't see them when they shot them. That's great, fabulous. And then we'll end the day with the last day on Earth. We'll end on the little flight ponds there, and if things are right, they can be fabulous. The widgeon coming off the cave. It's behind an old seawall, so it's a fresh marsh, but you've got the estuaries just there, and they come in off there. Pintail, widgeon, a teal. It's fantastic. A few greylag turn up sometimes, but they're like a bycatch. We'll have a great day, and the last dog will pick the last teal out of the rushes, and you'll have got everything you shot, and we'll put the sack over our shoulders, tramp back across the marsh to the cars, and be the happiest boy that live on the planet. That's
if you could see our smiles now, it's so infectious hearing these things. They're awesome. So probably 12 hours in one place with all that different activity.
Yeah. Absolutely, and every angle of shot and every type of thing, and I think we had a day of days when the boys were about 14, 15, and I think we got to about 78 head
Wow.
And we've had other days where we've had 7 head probably. So there were 3 pheasants, which are complete bycatch. They were eaten, of course, for the rest of it. But we had all the dabbling ducks, every species of dabbling duck.
Wow.
And I think we had all the waders. We had a woodcock as well. So it's just shooting beyond. But it's proper sport in that you when the weather's right, when it's not too wet elsewhere, but it's not too dry, and all the rest of it, then stuff will be there. And it's heaven for me. And I always say I'm very lucky, and I've had all sorts of shooting experiences, but to be able to be out with friends hunting wild, really wild sport. That's my last day. Yeah.
Sounds amazing.
Epic.
So you're going as well. I think I might tag along too.
I can see us all there.
Yeah.
Oh yes. Bring your waders.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Tim, for joining us.
Oh, thanks a lot. It's been great fun.
Really good.
Right, so before we go, as per usual, all that remains for me to say is there's a final reminder that you can get your hands on a pair of the very exclusive Guns on Pegs podcast shooting sock garters by sending us your shooting dilemmas for us to resolve, or by sharing your unpopular opinions, or telling us about your forgotten drives, or drives with particularly good names. Just send us an email to pod@gunsonpegs.com, and if we read it out in the next episode or any future episodes, we will send you some garters. We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time with another episode, but until then, thanks very much for listening, and goodbye.